Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Dondi Costin, president of Liberty University. Dondi will be one of 4 plenary speakers at this year's annual meeting happening at the Rosen Plaza Hotel in sunny Orlando, Florida. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE. And this is an episode I've been looking forward to for some time, and that's because of our guest, and that's Dondi Costin. Dondi will actually be one of our 4 plenary speakers at our annual meeting coming up in February. And if you've not registered yet, be sure to do that. Take advantage of our early bird pricing. But Dondi is the president of Liberty University, has been there since 2023. Prior to being at Liberty, he was a major general in the United States Air Force, as well as chief of chaplains in the Air Force. Also served as president of Charleston Southern University. And just thrilled to have you, Dondi. Thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the invitation and look forward to the conversation.
Great. So let's talk about your journey. You have quite the experiences, both serving in a church context. You've served in the military. You've served in Christian higher education. I wonder if when you were in kindergarten, when they were asking, what do you want to do when you grow up? I wonder if that was the trajectory that you said that you wanted to be a university president. So tell us, was that always your plan, or other things happened in your life to kind of direct you to where you are today?
I didn't have a plan. And so I trusted the Lord to come up with something because I had nothing. And thankfully he did. Yep. I was probably called to the ministry in high school. So 15, 16 years old, I grew up in a Christian home from, strong believers as parents and a solid church and, all the things that as I look back upon my life, I just thank God for, because as having spent much of my professional life as a chaplain, I ran into so many who didn't have the kind of upbringing that I had. And I just thank God for my parents and the church and all of that. But what I noticed is I noticed 2 things. I felt like God was calling me to the ministry of some sort. And I knew that I was scared to death to speak in public. And so I said, you know what? I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I know that if you're a preacher, you have to stand in front of people 2 or 3 times a week and talk. And I said, I'm not doing that. And so the Lord was gracious in his mercy and his providence and all of that. And so he sent me to the U.S. Air Force Academy. Nobody in my family had gone that route. I stumbled upon it sort of by accident, providentially, at North Carolina Boys State, and so as a rising senior in high school, I heard about it, and there were 2 things that one interested me and one interested my mom. The thing that interested me was you can serve your country, and I said, well, that sounds like something that I would like to do. And the second thing interested my mother, and that was you can go to college for free. And so when I told her that, she was like, okay, this is the plan all of a sudden. And so, it's a long, involved process, and some of your listeners will remember the time before the internet and all that. And so everything was typed on a typewriter and all of that. But because it was such a long, involved process to be accepted to the Air Force Academy, I said that was a lot of work to get into this place. If I don't like it, I can leave. Well, the thing I'd forgotten was my mom. She reminded me often that Costins are a lot of things, but we're not quitters. And so even if I'd wanted to quit, she would not have left me. Fast forward, 4 years or so, and I'm a second lieutenant, industrial engineer in the Air Force, and I have this renewed sense of calling. And it's a calling immediately to be an Air Force chaplain. And I loved Air Force people. I loved the thought of serving Air Force people. I loved the Air Force and didn't ever want to leave it. Again, for a guy without a plan, that's just kind of how it worked out. So I needed to be educated, and again, this was pre-internet, and so I went in and I tell the youth pastor at this church that I was attending, where I met my wife, and in Sunday school, I explained to him my dilemma. I said I need some education, and I don't know how to get this education because I'm a conservative evangelical. Baptist, and I want to be a chaplain. And how do I do that? Because I still had a commitment to the Air Force for a number of years left at that point. And so he opens up his desk drawer, and he pulls out of his desk drawer a brochure for Liberty University School of Lifelong Learning.
Wow.
This was the precursor to any kind of online education. Liberty has really always been, Liberty was on the forefront of innovating in higher education, and they figured out a way to convince the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools that it is possible to do accredited education, by extension. And so I got my first master's degree from the precursor to Liberty University online, and so they would send videotapes in the mail. I'd watch the lectures. I would have to go to a test proctor to take the test that they would send to the test proctor, and any papers I would write. And when I explain this to students, they don't even understand snail mail. I said I'd have to write a paper. I would print it out. I'd staple it. I'd put it in an envelope. I would drive it to the post office, and it had to be postmarked, by a certain day. And that was how I got my first master's degree. But that was also my first introduction to Liberty University. But I wound up getting a degree in residence because the Air Force, in its infinite wisdom, sent us to a base about 3 hours away as newlyweds near Liberty. And so I took about a dozen weeks of leave, and I would come over and take a week at a time to do a class at a time that way. So that's
which I'll interrupt you there. Like, that was what years was that you were studying at Liberty?
I took my first class in 1988.
Okay.
I graduated from Liberty University's extension program, with an accredited degree in counseling in 1991, and I finished the second degree, Master of Arts in Religion, from the residential seminary in 1992. Then, not all those hours transferred because I went to Southwestern Seminary, and back in 1992 when I showed up, I was teaching Air Force ROTC at Crosstown at TCU. But back then, they only accepted 8 hours of any kind of extension, even though it was accredited, only 8 hours of the 96. And so fortunately, I had enough residential credits, and I tested out of 9 additional hours of courses that I had taken, by the videotape method.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Back even in 1988, when you were doing I guess it would have been like correspondence, maybe tagged as correspondence programming or delivery.
Yeah, I think back then most would have considered it that.
Yeah. But Liberty was already on the cutting edge, and it's hard to imagine that was cutting edge, but that was cutting edge in 1988. I mean, pretty much all of higher education, it was resident based. If you wanted a degree, if you wanted what the industry would say, a legitimate college experience, it was, going to campus. So Liberty really does have quite a track record. It's not like all of a sudden they decided, well, let's hop on this online education wagon. It's been part of the DNA of Liberty pretty much from its founding, to approach things differently.
Yeah, that's right. And because they had done that, so that they got permission to do it in 1985. And so Dr. Falwell and the provost at the time flew down to Atlanta, as the story goes, and so they were kind of the first out of the chute. But what that meant was, because they had 10 or 15 years of experience, by the time the internet came to be, Liberty was already well ahead of the curve. Again, that's just God in His providence doing things that only He could have done.
Yeah. So then you go off to Southwestern Seminary.
Yeah, I'm teaching Air Force ROTC at TCU. I mean, that's another involved story. That basically at the 6-year point, I had a 5-year commitment out of the Air Force Academy. Again, I love the Air Force, as did my wife. Didn't want to get out, but at the time, the only way that I was going to be able to stay in the Air Force and go to seminary was if the Air Force sent me to an assignment close enough to a seminary. Again, because there was no internet. And so I went to the school I wanted to attend was Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. And the school where I taught ROTC was TCU, which was 10 minutes away. And so I took classes at 7 in the morning. And Southwestern was on the cutting edge, really, because they had already begun to think about, working professionals, if you will. And so I would go to class at 7 a.m., 4 days a week. I'd wear my uniform because I had to, the class was 7 to 7:50 and I had to be at work by 8, which I did. And then I went at lunch, took my lunch hour and took classes. And then I went at night. And so again, this was a 96 semester hour program I had to finish. And I had to finish that program because being an Air Force chaplain required it. And so I didn't have any choices. And so although I started without a plan, the Air Force and Southwestern Seminary in Liberty gave me a plan. And so that's how that happened. And then when I became a chaplain at the 10-year point after having been commissioned, I was endorsed to the chaplaincy by Liberty Baptist Fellowship, which is an endorsing agency underneath the umbrella of Liberty University, et cetera. And that agency still exists and still endorses chaplains.
So then you entered the chaplaincy, and how many years did you serve as a chaplain?
I spent 10 years as a line officer, as an industrial engineer, and 22 years as a chaplain before I retired. Yeah.
So 32 years total in the military.
36 technically, because the time 4 years at the Air Force Academy, you're on active duty and you're subject to the UCMJ and all that stuff. And so 32 or 36, depending on how you do the math. But
so then the transition going from serving in the military as a chaplain to higher education, did that happen kind of naturally for you? Did you leave the military to become a president, or was there time between?
No, the only reason I left the military is because the military said it's time for you to leave the military. I'd still be in there to this day, but I'd reached whatever rank I was going to reach, and so it was time for me to go. And when I informed my wife that it was time for us to leave the military, she said, "Why? You're just getting started." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I'm not sure where those 36 years went, but here we are." And so I said to her, and she was a 23-year elementary school teacher. She taught elementary school music in public schools. And so I said to her, I got to go find something else to do. I'd gotten a PhD a number of years prior, because my assumption was maybe I'll go teach at a college or a seminary. I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. What I discovered by the time I retired as Air Force Chief of Chaplains is that my last 3 jobs, so 2 jobs before the Chief of Chaplains job, I was the senior Air Force chaplain in the Middle East, during a wartime phase. And so that was really, I found that to be a lot. I very much enjoyed it. I loved leading sharp people who were committed to a cause greater than themselves. And I enjoyed the administrative and the combination of administration and personal leadership aspects of those jobs. And the next job I had was a senior chaplain, Air Force chaplain, in the Pacific. And so the bases for which I was responsible went from Fairbanks, Alaska, all the way to Okinawa, Japan, and South Korea. And so really every Air Force installation in between. And so then added to that, becoming Air Force Chief of Chaplains, again, I love the idea of a sharp group of people leading other sharp groups of people for life change among effectively what amounted to 18 to 22-year-olds. So most of a chaplain's life in ministry is spent with 18 to 22-year-olds who are trying to find their way in life. And so when Vicki and I, my wife, talked about what was next, I said, I wonder if there's a place that I could combine, the impact we can have on 18 to 22-year-olds and, this set of professional skills that I have so enjoyed, exercising. And it seemed to be that Christian higher ed was the way to go. And so I applied for a couple of positions. And one of those was replacing a guy, Dr. Jerry Hunter at Charleston Southern University, someone who'd been there 34 years. And so when I went in to tell the general officer, Air Force General Officer Matters group that I was going to retire because my time was coming up, and they said, well, you can serve one more year if you want. You can have a 4th. It doesn't happen much, but we'd like you to serve. And I said, well, I wish I'd known that 8 months ago, but I found a job, and I'm not sure what'll happen a year from now. And the person asked me, she said, is this the job of a lifetime? And I said, well, It's certainly the job of my lifetime because the guy I'm replacing was there 34 years. And so just in God's providence, the Secretary of the Air Force is the one who has to, had to let me go. And as it turns out, before she was Secretary of the Air Force, she also graduated from the Air Force Academy. And then now, after being Secretary of the Air Force, she's a college president. So when I explained to her what I was going to do, she said, absolutely, it's a great job. You're going to love it. And, go and all of that. So that's kind of how that happened. And again, just the weaving of the thread of the providence of God through all of that. It's not a story. If I had a plan, it would never have amounted to what God orchestrated through all of that. It wouldn't have been something I could have even imagined. And so God has done more than I could ever have asked or imagined in the most literal of senses.
It's such a beautiful story, especially when you let off talking about how you didn't like to speak in front of people. And, I've often said as I'm working with people discipling, younger adults, that, had God given me, hey, this is what you're going to be doing 30 years from now, we probably would just hand it back to him and say, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to do that. But yet God in his sovereignty gives us the experiences and relationships, and he's building that plan, which is such a beautiful thing. And I was, and I just want to say thank you too for your service for so many years and playing such a critical role. My wife's grandfather served as a chaplain in World War II. And we have some great artifacts, a couple of his Bibles and a little tiny notebook of all of his sermons. And it's just such a great reminder for us. We kind of display them so that we see them on a regular basis of his life and legacy, and the countless conversations that he would have had, the countless conversations that you've had working with people in just difficult experiences and difficult situations, and at such a formative age, 18 to 22-year-olds. So thank you for your service. So let's switch over. So you're now in higher education, and you've been serving at one of our largest universities in the country. You're in your third year of leadership, probably fourth year of leadership. Talk to us about your biggest challenge as well as your biggest success, because you know enough to be dangerous now, being there the years that you have. So biggest challenge so far and biggest success.
That's right. Well, the biggest challenge, Vicki and I in our military careers, we've moved something like 18 times in 18 different houses and all of that. And so the biggest challenge coming here was the challenge I had every other place, and that was missing where you have to leave. And so we loved where we were. We loved what we were doing. We were looking forward to, the future, but the Lord called us here. And so, a grieving process that you grieve, where you're coming from. And as you're looking forward with hopeful anticipation as to what's next. And so coming here was exactly that. But Liberty is an extraordinary place. It's an amazing place. It's a remarkable place. And the hand of God is here in highly evident ways. Going back to, Dr. Falwell, just having this vision from God that when nobody else believed, he did. And as I remind our students and others often, as it turns out, it only takes one. It only takes one person to believe that God's vision and for that mission is going to happen, and Dr. Falwell did. And so coming here, it's always a different. You change context, and so there's a different culture of sorts. Liberty had a different history than Charleston Southern had, for instance. But I learned a lot at Charleston Southern about higher education, about leadership, about following someone who'd been here for a long time. And so all of that really was great preparation to come here. There's always a challenge. I am who I am. I have my personality and my gift sets and my approach to life and leadership, and that is probably going to be different than the person who came before me. Well, I can't change who I am, and so just letting other people know that, hey, this is who God, this is who I am, this is who God has made me to be, and so surrounding ourselves with people who have gifts and experiences and talents that I don't have, so they can complement, my weaknesses and my growth areas. And so that's always a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. And it's in that challenge that you get to know the culture, you get to know the university, you get to know the things that you need to know, that you can only know by having boots on the ground. And so that, as far as that goes, has been probably the biggest challenge.
Well, let me pause there, because I really like you said a lot about leadership right there, of a leader being self-aware as to who they are, even at the most foundational level of being created in the image of God with talents, gifts, and abilities, and knowing what those are and being comfortable in your own skin and leading with how God has created you to lead. And in that process, recognizing the areas of deficiencies that you have, making sure then that you have people around you that helps in those deficiencies. I heard a study once that the average leader, I don't know how they count this, but has 2.5 blind spots. Well, they're blind spots because you don't see them, and you need people around you to speak into that. So being comfortable in your own skin and your own leadership, I think, is such a great leadership lesson for our younger folks.
Yeah, it really is. And so self-awareness is probably the most significant gift that God can give you if you will let him give it to you. Why do we do discipleship? Why do we do community groups? What is accountability? It's you being in a place where you realize you don't have it all together. You don't have all the answers. And the most freeing thing for any leader is to know that, hey, guess what? You don't have to have all the answers. That nothing is more freeing than that, because then you can go, okay, here's where I am deficient, and I'll work on these things, but probably they're not going to get that much better. But who can I surround myself with that will, for the good of the organization, step up and do the things that I simply can't do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those were some of the challenges coming into the position. Talk to us about what would you say is your greatest success so far?
Yeah, the most meaningful leadership book that I have read. I read very early on, the first time, 25 years ago now, the first time I had to be in charge of other people. It was a team of people, half officer, half enlisted. And so I read a book called You're in Charge, Now What? Well, that's a pretty incredible question, because it's the question I've asked every time. And the gist of the book is, let's come up with a series of questions, ask all your key senior leaders and others that you have supervisory responsibility for, hear from them, and then brief them what you found, and then together let's come up with a plan. And so two things really came out of that, and I spent hours and hours and hours and hours reading the responses of more than 50 of our senior leaders and others and deans. And then I met with every single one individually for at least an hour and a half. That process said that there are two things that we don't have to wait on this. There may have been other contexts where I would have done a listening tour for a year, whatever, but I knew pretty early on that our organizational culture was something we could go ahead and get started on in our strategic plan. So we didn't need to wait. And so again, that gave me, the leadership, permission to go ahead and start moving out on the things that my teammates at the time, our teammates had said, we need to do this. And so in both of those instances, if I'd waited a year, if I'd done the traditional listening tour, it would have been too long. It would have been seen as spinning my wheels. And so I said, great, I didn't want to wait anyway. And so there's no need to. Let's get going. And so the successes, I think, to date, are our work in strategic planning, and the way in which Liberty is able to go about these things with technological solutions, et cetera, is remarkable. And then the culture, and so we are working with best Christian workplaces because we, in fact, want to be a best Christian workplace. Dr. Falwell used to say, if it's Christian, it ought to be better. And if you walk around the campus of Liberty University, you see excellence. It has always been in the DNA of Liberty University. And so I simply added a corollary to that. If it's Christian, it ought to be Christian. And so everything here at Liberty, we want to demonstrate excellence, but also excellence in the sense that everything we do for the glory of God. And so those two things have been the biggest, and they're ongoing, and we're making progress, but we're not where we, hopefully, Lord willing, we will be one of these days.
Yeah. I like how you gave yourself permission, or your team around you gave you permission. I have seen, and I think it probably still is the typical mode of operation for a president to come into the presidency and spend the first year kind of listening before taking significant action. I'm not sure moving forward if there's too much wisdom in that. Now, I'm not suggesting you blow up the place in the first day, but when you look at the average tenure of presidents already shrinking, and I think it's down into the 5-6 year range at this point, you don't have the luxury of waiting a year. And I'm a firm believer that institutions are headed into two directions, either up or down. There's no flat. And waiting that year, I think you lose opportunity and potential momentum to get going. Now, I guess there's also risk associated with that too, but it sounds like you stepped into the perfect environment to just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think there is wisdom in waiting to some extent, but you have to, this is where leadership is art and science. And so as a general rule, Cotter's 8-step approach is create a sense of urgency. Well, if the sense of urgency is already there, if the board has hired you because the sense of urgency is there, then okay, you have permission from the get-go. And then the next thing is, develop a guiding coalition. Well, people around you, so that as long as you are bringing people who are the experts, and the experts are people who've been there well before you got there, and so they know where the challenges are, they know where the problems are, they know where the goodness is. And so working together and moving quicker than I think in a previous era, I think is right on.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on this at the beginning, talking about your own educational experience and Liberty being on the cutting edge, even back in 1988 when we had word processors and the snail mail to submit all of our work. So as you kind of look at the next 10 years, and you've been in higher education now for a number of years, so you have some context to share your thoughts. Where do you see Christian and biblical higher education going in terms of what are our threats to survival? What are some of our greatest opportunities? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think our threats are just what would apply to every other tuition-driven institution. Mm-hmm. It's tough work, and there are institutions that 40 students above budget is like a gift. 40 students below budget, man, you're cutting costs, you're having difficulty. And so tuition-driven institutions are sort of all in the same boat. And so, those financial fundamentals we all have to deal with. And given that we've just had, this past May, as I understand it, we've just had our highest graduating class of high school graduates for the foreseeable future. So, there's going to be there's a shrinking pool with the same number of universities. And so a number of our colleagues have had to shut their doors recently. Someone said to me, what would be your greatest wish for Christian higher education? I wish that there was a Bible-believing, God-honoring, healthy Christian university in every congressional district in America.
Amen.
Because if that were the case, every congressperson, whether they agreed with you or not, would realize the benefit of a Christian education to society, to the community. Because what we provide, nobody else can provide. We are the pathway to human flourishing, and we do so by helping our students, faculty, and staff align themselves with God's plan for human flourishing, based on the book that has always been the bestseller and is the bestseller to this day. Why wouldn't we do that? So that's what I think. Any university, any Christian university that thinks that pulling back from their Christian faith, distinctively Christian faith, is going to be good for you, it's the biggest mistake you will ever make. You need to lean way into it, because this is what people want, especially these days. They want universities that stand for something, and man, we stand for the best thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah, boy, preach. I couldn't agree with you more. And I love that vision of having a Christian college and university, a presence in every congressional district. I mean, that can you imagine what kind of difference that would make in our country and our world? And you all are at the cutting edge of doing that and leading by example. I also like how I've been in multiple contexts where, it's the smaller institutions who say, boy, if we just had resource like a Liberty University, or we're not Liberty University, but I think Liberty is impacted just like you are. It's just at a different scale of operation. In fact, it's a whole lot more complex in some ways, but the same things that influence and impact our smaller institutions are the exact same things that Liberty has to deal with.
Yeah, that's right. And I would say to any institution, I came from one where those fundamentals were just like everybody else's. Yeah. I would say, you can state that for about 30 seconds and then go, okay, so what?
Exactly.
We got to do what we got to do. And we have a mission and a context that is exclusive to us. And so how can we demonstrate to our community and our portion of the region that we are doing the thing that God has called us to do?
Yeah. And thus the opportunity that's in front of us for Christian higher education, right?
That's right.
I think that really is the opportunity. This world desperately needs what our graduates are prepared to do, whether they state it or not. And, you think about the potential impact, in our movement, smaller movement, we have 75,000 students at all of our institutions. Well, God can do something with that. And collectively, can you imagine what would happen if we continue to grow this thing, and God would be honored and glorified, and the good news of Jesus Christ would continue to get, and we would make our communities, our churches that much better, and thus the opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, that's right. God has always had a remnant. And we get to be the remnant. Good. All right. And so you look at how God has used the remnant in millennia gone by, and we just beg God, okay, God, we're yielded to you. We're humbling ourselves before you. We're asking you to do what only you can do through us in our context. Please do that, and let us be obedient to you.
Yep, and let's roll up our sleeves and get it done, right?
Get it done.
I love it. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I wish we had a whole nother episode that we could do. Last minute and a half here. A lot of listeners on our show are younger leaders who are kind of early on in their leadership journeys. What's one last thought that you'd like to leave with them as you reflect back on your own leadership journey? What word of encouragement would you give to them?
Two things I say to every new second lieutenant, every new graduate, and that is bloom where you're planted and don't burn any bridges. God has placed you where he's placed you. You can gripe about it. You can say, oh God, Don't you know how great I am? Shouldn't you have given me a better job and a bigger place or more money? Or you can say, no, God, you've put me here. I'm going to live for your glory in this place. And I'm not going to burn any bridges. And the way you burn a bridge as a young leader is to be a whining, moaning complainer. Instead, what you do is you just say, okay, I'm never going to talk about myself. The boss is never going to hear me say my name. He's never going to hear me, or she's never going to hear me talk about how good I am. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the best possible job for the glory of God. And you will find over time that you get more work, because your boss knows that because you came from a Christian school, for instance, that you have a Christian character, and you have in your spiritual DNA, you have this notion of service. And because you're living for the glory of God, you're the one who takes initiative. You're the one who brings not just problems to the boss, you bring solutions. And your colleagues also around you, you can help them out. You can take things off of their plate. You be the one that your friends and colleagues go to for help, and you be the one that your boss recognizes, okay, if I want something done, I'm going to go with her because she gets it done and she never complains. So those two things will serve you well.
Yeah. Oh man, I love it. And you mentioned one of my top leadership axioms that I live by, and it's no problem if you identify problems, but when you identify problems, you offer solutions at the same time. And when somebody who is under your care and authority identifies problems and solutions, that's gold, like you said. Dondi, really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much. I look forward to being with you in February.
Fantastic. And if you'd like more information about Liberty University, we will be sure to put a link to their website in our show description. And looking forward to seeing everybody in February in sunny Orlando, Florida at the Rosen Plaza Hotel for our annual meeting. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.
The Biblical Higher Ed Talk podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.